Hi, my name is Winslayet, and welcome to my video on which primal is the best and why in Age of Wonders 4. Just to be clear, I'm talking about the 7 different primal options that we got with the Primal Fury expansion in Age of Wonders 4. I recently saw this question asked on Reddit, and it reminded me of a video I did right before Primal Fury was released. Thanks again to Triumph for including me in that early coverage. But yeah, I was thinking that now that people have had a chance to actually try out these factions, that it would be a good time to revisit this topic and discuss what people overall are saying is the best primal option. I do think that it's worth making clear what my criteria is for what is the best primal animal. And for me, it mostly comes down to how these guys fare in combat. There is an economic aspect to this, and you can get some quests with different goals and rewards, which I also covered in a separate video about 2 weeks ago. Now, specifically for this video, what I want to do is I want to look at the votes that people cast in this poll, and then I want to discuss the comments down here, but it's a little bit all over the place. So I think what might make more sense is after we've discussed the poll, we'll go over to my list and we'll go through each of these primal animals one by one. I went and organized all the thoughts people had about the crocodile in this thread, and then I added my own thoughts in here. So that'll be basically what we do with the second half of the video. As I mentioned earlier, Wolf is missing from this poll, and that's because I believe Reddit only lets you vote on up to 6 things on any given poll. So they said basically people can leave comments below explaining why they think Wolf is the best or where they think Wolf would fall in this general list. And what I find interesting is I think Wolf is better than the Mammoth, but worse than the Crocodile. If you look at my list below, I put Crocodile first, followed by Wolf, followed by Mammoth. But with the list that people put online, with this poll that people voted on, people actually said they prefer the Mammoth to the Crocodile. But I think those two are relatively close in terms of just general power. Whereas I think the Crocodile has like more highs and lows. The Mammoth just has like a generally pretty easy to apply thing with its frozen status effect. The crocodile kind of relies on people needing to get the diseased and potentially being weak to poisoned. Whereas mammoth just kind of does its job relatively consistently, but has some like fairly consistent pitfalls that it runs into. And then let's see, after it, the crocodile, actually the crow has slightly more votes than the crocodile, but those are reasonably close. I think the crow is really interesting. I like the jumping damage, but I don't know if I put it that far up on the list. If we look here, the crow actually has fallen a little bit further down the list for me because I feel like in general I like some of the other animals more. In theory, I really like the AoE damage that the crow does, and I think a lot of other people really like the lightning channel damage that the crow does, but I think it just falls off after a certain point. Although somebody was disagreeing and saying that the crow has some of the best mid to late game damage potential because of its ability to really focus on that lightning damage channel. So yeah, we've talked about crow, crocodile, mammoth briefly, and then next on the list is the spider, which is really funny because for me, I hate playing the spider. I really dislike the way the temples generate, and I think knowledge, getting that much knowledge is kind of silly, and it should probably get nerfed. But I feel like if I was kind of playing in a vacuum, if I was playing more single player, I probably like Spider more too. But yeah, generally, I'm just not a big fan of playing underground, and I think that's kind of like made me enjoy the Spider playthroughs a little bit less. And it's really interesting because they put Serpent and Sabertooth as like the furthest down, or I guess only 32 people voted for them as the best, which is different than people saying it's the worst. They just there's less people that think the Serpent is the total best or the Sabertooth is like the overall best here. The Sabertooth may be one of the weaker ones. I kind of generally agree with what people have been saying about it being not great, not having access to foresters and other things that can boost your economy, but it does have like some other nice things going for it. After that, there's the Serpent that can blind. Oh, right. And I also do think that it's worth pointing out that the numbers that this list is based on are likely going to change over the development of the game. We have at least one more DLC, the Eldritch Realms, which is coming out, I think, sometime in Q2 2024. That will probably have a big patch that rebounces the game that comes out alongside Eldritch Realms, kind of like with the Watcher update in Empires and Ashes and the Wolf update with Primal Fury. Generally speaking, I would say the crocodile is the best primal animal because it has the potential to do the most damage and it's easier for it to reach that potential. I do think in general the wolf is going to do more damage across the board. There's going to be less things that present issues for the wolf. For example, in this fight, I may want to use the conjure primal animal behind these enemies because, well, that would get them to spend their actions on this guy and keep the damage off of my guys while also dealing a lot of damage. But this is a lot less damage than normal because of the blight resistance and the immunity to disease. The fact that these guys are immune to poison as well is kind of annoying because if you're going for something that focuses on blight damage, you may also be taking something that focuses on poison. I know Hideous Stench and Poisonous is a pretty popular build for the Croc, but this guy, he's going to be immune to not only the diseased from that build, but also the poisoned, and I think that is same for Constructs. So there are certain units that you won't be able to use the Croc summon or the Croc abilities against as efficiently as other stacks, whereas the Wolf is just, there's less things that block spirit damage. It's easier to get the spirit damage, so it's generally easier to apply, but I think the Croc, when it does hit hard, it's better. It's just really good to be able to take away people's resistance from its attack. The disease lowers resistance on each attack, and each following attack gets thrashing, making it deal more damage. So I think in general, this one has the highest individual target damage potential for a single summon, but there's all these other interactions that come into play. For example, I think the Serpent's Blind is really good at making your other units benefit or do better in a fight, but it's not going to clear out enemies as efficiently as a Primal Crocodile. So the Primal Crocodile is probably better in earlier fights than the Primal Serpent. Another nice thing about the disease tag is it makes it so that people are just going to be weaker against all magic damage, not just poison magic damage. It will also spread to other units, so you need to be a little bit careful that you don't put units that can't get diseased next to enemies that are already diseased. But if you take the Croc, then it can make it so that your guys just don't get diseased. I believe if I check out just any of my like other units here, they should have the tag that says they're immune to disease. Yeah, I think this guy, he should have it over here. He's got the Mire Crocodile Balloon. He cannot be basically poisoned, and he cannot be poisoned. So pretty good build in general. Another nice build that people were recommending to me is if you take Wizard King plus Gifted Casters and Mana Channelers, then it makes it so that you can summon in a Croc for 9 mana. So you can just get lots of casting points, lots of mana, and just keep summoning in units, and that's pretty tricky to deal with unless you're playing another like primal who can also summon in animals. It's just a lot of action points, and I think a Stormcrow counters another primal really nicely, but it has very specific applications. Whereas I think the Croc is just generally pretty solid, and yeah, if you like things that are reliable, you'll probably like the Wolf more. The economic bonus that the crocodiles get for their favorite terrain is extra food, and I have to say that feels like one of the worst bonuses that you can get on your economy. I think the crocodile having one of the stronger combat effects probably led to it having a weaker economic effect, and that makes sense for balancing based off of what I've seen on the other animals. I'm a big fan of the wolf in combat, but not as big of a fan of getting draft on my favorite terrain because that doesn't do anything in outposts. Sure, it might be really nice if I'd like want to build a lot of units very quickly, but I feel like it's harder to make use out of food and draft, and then production would be one of the other ones that's a little bit harder to make use of, but it's easier to make use of than food or draft. And that's interesting because those are my three like favorite animals from a combat point of view. We have the crocodile does food, we have the wolf does draft, and we have the mammoth does production. While I could spend a lot of time talking about the special quests that the crocodile gets here, I did want to mention again that I did a video that covered this, and that basically what you need here is you need to get a second den, then after that you need to build a bunch of conduits, and the reward for that is basically you get the ability to have Rising Fury on your ruler at the beginning of combat and something else. I forget exactly what the crocodile gets, but you can check out my other video if you want to know. We are now ready to talk about the Sylvan Wolf, who can do just a ridiculous amount of damage on a single target. Right now, he's doing 51 damage after 3 attacks, and if I wanted to do more, I would just need to place another unit next to this enemy, and I get a little bit more damage on each of my repeating attacks. If I placed another one over here, it looks like it's a little hard to get somebody in that place. I could do more damage, or if like theoretically took this guy over here and brought this guy in next to him, then look at that. I don't even need another unit to attack to kill this unit. The Serpent actually has 1 resistance, so I could be doing even more damage if it had like 0 resistance, or if somehow I was able to disease it to reduce its resistance below 0. That could allow me to do a lot more damage too. And I just think this is really, really good. If you can run a few units next to an enemy and then kill off an enemy, that's a lot of actions gone for the enemy, and it's better than stunning in a unit or freezing a unit. While it's great that the Mammoth can stun a lot, I think being able to kill units like this is very valuable, specifically in the early game when it's going to be easier for your tier 2 to kill off enemy units. As I mentioned earlier, the favored terrain for the Sylvan Wolf is forests. It gives a little bit of draft, and while that's not amazing, one really interesting thing about forests and nature and this faction in particular is this faction gives you forest walk, and if we go to one of the tomes, the Tome of Roots, we can see a plant animal that also has forest walk. Right, you can see the tag from here. You can see that he gets forest walk. He also has forest camouflage, so you can keep these guys in your woods and then launch a ambush. But another neat thing about these nature tomes is they had these special province things which benefit for being near woods. Like this one gets adjacency for being near either swamps or forests, and I think the same is true for the Tome of Beasts. So you can get a lot of adjacency out of these early nature tomes if you wanted to go that direction with it. And I think a lot of people were saying that having the extra draft can be really good if you take Tome of Glades as your second tome because of these Glade Runners. They're just like above and beyond all the other ranged units, mostly because of the tracker's mark. Sure, the AI is not great with it, but if you can control that unit, it's very valuable being able to mark things that are far away from you and then being able to hit them from a safer distance. The Mammoth is a really interesting primal because, like the Crocodile, it has a lot of very big highs and very low lows. Or, in other words, it runs into some issues that other primals don't. But what I find also really interesting about it is it comes with a lot of things that can affect your other unit's ability to do things. Kind of like how I mentioned that the Serpent can blind. This guy can freeze enemies, which makes their actions either less efficient or it makes your factions more efficient. Because when you fail a freeze chance, they become slowed, and that can mean that if you've got like Cryomancy, your Frostblades will just do more damage against that area of or against those types of units unless they're immune to frozen, which does happen with the spawn that the Mammoth creates. They do create a lot of units like these guys, these frost elementals, which if I try to freeze them, I can't. All I can do is damage. And while that is a decent amount of damage spread across a lot of other units, that's that's not as valuable as freezing a group of 3, 4, maybe 5 units with this single action, or not single action, this full action stomp. You can just summon this in the right position and then stomp in an AoE around the target, which is pretty good. But if you wanted to say like push somebody off of your animus, say this guy was ready to summon in somebody, but somebody was standing adjacent to him. If you need to push a unit away from your support, you can use the charge strike on this guy to get people out of the way. So I find that this guy is really interesting in its functionality. It doesn't do direct damage like the wolf, but it does allow your army to do some pretty cool stuff. One of the really neat things about this faction is if they get enough of their Rising Fury, if they get 5 stacks, then they should be able to freeze enemies with their regular attacks. A 30% chance to freeze is not nothing, especially when you consider a fail frozen will slow an enemy. This can make it so that it's a lot easier for your ranged attacks or attackers to get away from melee attackers. If somebody runs a melee attacker next to a ranged unit, they are in zone control, and I think Frozen can either allow them to move away from the enemy or potentially even attack the enemy while they're still adjacent to them. In general, I would rank this up there as one of the best Furies that you can get from your primal animals, if not the best. The economic benefit the Mammoth gets for having snow inside of its cities is production, which, as I mentioned earlier, is useless on outposts, but quite good on your cities. If you can make it so that you're building something in your cities every turn, having production is very valuable. But say if you don't have the gold to produce something, that production gets turned into gold at a very inefficient rate. So one thing this faction wants to be doing is constantly building things, even if you don't have access to the things that boost the buildings or reduce their overall cost. I think generally because you have more production, you can afford to just say, I don't need the boost a little bit more often. Say I wanted to get the Town Hall 3, I wouldn't necessarily wait for that to grow up to 10 pops before getting that started building. I think generally speaking, people don't do that anyways. But you keep that in mind. I think production isn't the worst, but you do need to be building things to get value out of it. Now, if you take the Tome of Cryomancy, one thing you can build is a School of Cryomancy Special Province Improvement, which gets adjacency bonuses. And if you take the Mammoth start, then the terrain that you generate will give you the adjacency bonuses that the School of Cryomancy is looking for. It's basically looking for this snow terrain. I thought about putting it here where my megalith was, but that's a really nice building that also benefits from being surrounded by snow. And as you can kind of see, I don't have a lot of snow all around this city, so you kind of have to pick your battles. But in general, I'd say that's very valuable and a pretty good contribution to your economy. Having extra knowledge early is very valuable. I find the Primal Serpent interesting for the same reasons that I find the Mammoth interesting. I feel like this unit is not supposed to kill off enemies really quickly. It's supposed to take the utility away from some higher level units. Being able to blind an enemy means that if they're a ranged unit, they're going to have a harder time at attacking things from range, and it removes retaliation. I think a lot of people forget that removing retaliation is actually very good on certain units. If you can do that on a charge unit or on a hero, this is guaranteed. It just happens 100% of the time. That hero is going to have a lot less damage potential that it can do. Um, so I did summon this guy here, and if I wanted to, I can make that guy remove his retaliation. If I'm standing here, then I believe I should get the first attack, remove his retaliation, and he doesn't attack here. But yeah, if you needed to move, then obviously you can't remove the retaliation before you attack. The other big combat advantage that this faction gets is the ability to get all of the units to blind things. It's kind of like how the Mammoth can get the ability to freeze units through its Rising Fury. These guys can get the ability to just guarantee blind. This isn't even a dice roll, just guarantees blind on enemies, removing retaliations on melee guys, and making it easier to deal with the range attacks. You won't have to deal with them until you're a lot closer. So I think that this has a lot of value for getting your guys close enough to engage the enemy after you've got enough Rising Fury. But that's kind of like a weird thing to get early in a fight unless you've got a lot of animists. The fact that this animal and its animists deal physical damage do hold them back quite a bit. Most units in the game have more armor than resistance, and in general, ranged units aren't super popular right now due to them not performing great in auto combat. That and the fact that this damage channel gets countered very, very hard by industrials who get bolstering resistance very easily, and iron golems who I think can also bolster defense, potentially in an AoE around them like the bastions can. It's been a minute since I looked at the Iron Golems. I think that leads to Serpents having a lot of very scary counters, like the Halberdier unit from the Industrial lineup. If we just look it up here, we'll see that it has bonus damage against large targets, and I think 66% of the primal animals or something like that are large targets, meaning that these guys are just going to do a bunch of extra damage against them. I don't think they count as cavalry, so it's not like plus 40% plus another 40%, but still this will add up quite quickly. And while it might feel bad to kill off summons using units like this, I think that if you use this unit, you could get like something like 48 damage. Well, assuming that you start next to the summon, you just need to place these guys across your army so that they can deal with summons uh, when they if they were to get summoned in. It could act as a defensive measure, just having a couple of these guys in your army, and they also can have the first strike. The rune of retaliation is generally pretty good. I don't think there's many uh, guys you can get around that. You may be able to flank with the serpent to remove the retaliation that way, but most of the animals will struggle against this unit. I don't have a lot to say about the economic potential of the Serpent other than when you compare it to the Ashland, this guy makes 2 gold per sand tile versus the Ashland makes plus 3 gold per ash tile. And I think that has to do with the fact that there's generally less things in the Ashland. It's harder to get a forester going, and therefore it's harder to get your academy and your research going in that start. So I think they kind of gave that one extra gold to kind of compensate for the fact that Ashland is kind of a like a weird one generally speaking. Um, but yeah, apart from that, I just like having gold. I think gold is really good. You can use it to rush by buildings, rush by units. You can use it to hire units. You can use it for a variety of things. So I think generally this one is very flexible, and I feel like yeah, it's interesting that the Ash Sabertooth can jump back. I don't feel like it's a very amazing tactical unit, and I don't feel like the Serpent is an amazing tactical unit, but they've both got their places. We are now ready to start looking at the Primal Crow. You might be thinking that I think that this animal is bad with it being this far down the list, but I don't think that's the case. I actually think this one is just more situational than the Crocodile, and if you're in that right situation, the Storm Crow is unparalleled. It's got I think like the highest high, but it's consistently at the lows more often than the others, which kind of pushes it further down in the rankings. So in general, I think that this crow is really, really good in small maps where you can get to the enemy quickly and take advantage of the damage potential before people can get a lot of resistance on their units. The effect that this attack will do damage to things that are near the enemy is it drops off very quickly. Soon you'll find yourself only doing 1 or 2 damage to the adjacent enemies. If we look here at like a turn 1 fight, I'm doing 12 damage to the guys next to the main target, but that's basically 3 repeating, and that can easily turn into 1 repeating after a few points of resistance. So I think that for that reason, the extra thing that this guy gets is pretty mediocre. The fact that all these other units can get something that does like a little bit of damage to people that are standing next to the enemy is it's nothing when you compare it to the ability to freeze an enemy or maybe blind them. There's just a lot less utility here. But the one thing it does do is a lot of damage very quickly, and there are a lot of things you can do on the strategic map to lower enemies' lightning resistance. There's I think Downpour does that. There's I think Lightning Torrent does that. So these guys, even though they have a pretty low damage output on their primary attack, you can boost that up a lot, and you can just really lean into one of the best damage channels out there. A lot of people say lightning is the best damage channel that you can have access to. So the fact that this animal does that means that you should be able to pick some fights which you where you can counter the enemy more easily. Like these guys, Ethereal, they're countered by lightning damage. The constructs, they're countered by lightning damage, and there may be some other things that I'm forgetting off the top of my mind. The Storm Crow's favorite terrain is grassland, and the fact that it gives you extra 2 mana for each province attached to a city or outpost with that terrain type is not nothing at all. I'd say it's one of the best, if not the best, economic benefit you can get from these, because that will allow you to really focus on casting spells on the strategic layer and the tactical layer. Like I talked about earlier, you could use things like Lightning Torrent, a very powerful spell on the strategic layer, and then when you get into the combat, it's easier or it's cheaper for you to, I guess it's not cheaper, yeah, it's easier for you to then summon in animals to take damage, leaving your other guys healthier for future fights, and to also deal damage so that the fights are over just generally a little bit quicker. Another interesting thing about grassland being favored terrain and that terrain generating around your capital is it's not going to be terrain that's harder for your enemy to move through. If you compare like the crocodile to this one, creating swamplands or maybe woods creates hexes that cost 8 movement points to get through, or for most people it's going to cost 8 movement points to get through. It's going to be cheaper for you if you have that as your favorite terrain. But the really neat thing about grasslands and this faction is it's cheaper to move across grasslands than it is to walk across roads. This fertile plains with roads costs 5 movement points versus if we look here, it costs us 4 movement points just to, I think, walk through uh, grasslands. Yeah, I just wanted to test this quickly. This guy has 15 movement. It takes 10 to go there, and then this unit he's going to lose 4 to go there. So it's actually it's cheaper not to use roads, which is pretty funny. The Sabertooth is one of the worst primal animals in combat. I remember when I first saw that it can pounce, thinking that would be pretty useful for getting into position after you take care of one target. It's very likely that people will run away from the summon, so being able to run to the edge of your movement, jump, and then still have an action to either attack again or go into defense mode is really nice. I also saw some potential with killing momentum and this specific ability, but I feel like the major downside for this faction is the fact that a lot of things are very resistant to fire. I remember thinking, oh, this is going to be amazing for fighting the undead. It's got great mobility. You can jump behind and deal with the necromancers, but I just don't think it's good enough because of things like Tome of Warding and just a lot of things being generally resistant to fire damage. The fact that this melee strike has a chance to inflict burning is pretty bad when you compare it to the fact that the thing that has a chance to inflict blind just happens, it just goes through. And the fact that burning counters frozen means that if you're using this animal, you're not going to be able to use the frozen effect as easily, although you're probably not combining fire and ice because there's a lot of things that just make those things not work well together. I just find this effect generally pretty bad, and the fact that the jumping damage doesn't have a chance to pass on the burning. It only has, actually wait, no, the jumping damage does seem to have a chance to spread the burning, which is interesting because I thought that wouldn't be the case when I came in here and I tested to see if my stun would jump from one unit to another. Yeah, that one doesn't. So the jumping damage on that attack does do the spreading of effects, and this one, if I look at here, it doesn't have a chance to spread condemn through the melee strike. So I guess the spreading damage works differently on units versus on the animal, which I hadn't considered that. I just am seeing that now. The nice thing about the Ash Sabertooth economic bonus is that you should be able to get more gold than any of the other factions. You're going to be able to get a considerable amount more gold than the Serpent, something like 3 for every 2. And I think the Megalith may be different too. I can't remember off my top of my head, but I think you can just basically get a lot more gold, which leads to you being able to rush out your like tier 3 town hall a lot faster, which in turn lets you get to the tier 3 polearm a little bit quicker. And I think the culture units for Primal are generally a lot better than the other ones. I think the Animist and the Primal Charger are amazing tier 2 units. Being able to hit multiple units with that charging cleaving charge is amazing. Being able to summon units with the Animus is amazing. And then that polearm, being able to jump forward and yet counter a lot of other units, just is it's a very good unit. So being able to access those a little bit earlier, I think might elevate the Sabertooth a little bit, but not quite enough to be competitive with the other primal animals. I've got some pretty mixed feelings on the Primal Spider, but I have to say I really do think it deserves the last place right now, even though I think the ability to get lifesteal on your melee attacks on this summon isn't bad, and being able to pass that on to any of the racial units or cultural units rather that can get their Rising Fury to 5 stacks is not nothing. That means that your units are going to have very good sustain. Usually by the time they've got a few stacks, they've taken a little bit of damage, and getting that health back means that they can stay in the fight longer. We saw this effect on a Mistling basically win a fight. Uh, I think it had like 6 or 7 units attacking the devs in one of their dev streams, but they just kept missing. And when the Mistling was landing its attacks, it was getting its health back. So I think in theory, this could be a really fun faction to play with. But in practice, I really dislike the way the totems generate. They're almost impossible to find underground, and I really dislike the way underground empires mess up the map generation. It just puts players way too close together. It almost forgets to account for the people that are underground. I know it does know that they're there, but it's not enough, and it makes the game a lot less fun for me to play around with. Another thing that we could point out here is that interestingly, this animal has something that happens at the end of his turn. It creates a mist where the unit was standing. So if this unit stands where it was standing, that's pretty good. It's going to be really hard for the enemy to deal with that. But if this unit does die, or if it wants to move, that means you can leave mist for an enemy to hide out in. And given the way I generally use these summons, basically going in right next to the enemy, that could be a problem. That could actually hurt you more than it helps. I think not all of the animals have something like that, but I do remember the Sabertooth had Fiery Wake. Basically, when it would walk over things like this grass or foliage, it would light it on fire and create a hazard for when people would try to sit in that cover. Um, but yeah, this one's unique in that it has the Trail the Mist. It's the only one that does Trail the Mist, and I feel like that could hurt you more than help you. The fact that you get poison on top of the lifesteal seems like unnecessary. I think the lifesteal is more than enough for this guy to be a pretty good combat unit. The fact that the favored terrain for the spider gives knowledge may look amazing on paper, and in practice it isn't bad. But the fact that you're going to be starting in an awkward place, I don't think is really worth the trade-off of having all these nice bonuses. Sure, you're going to be able to excavate the underground. You start off with the ability to do that for free, and you're going to be able to farm up a lot of fights and basically get like free levels because lifesteal will keep your guys alive a lot longer. um, but I feel like starting closer to an enemy just really throws off the game too much for me to enjoy that experience. It's just silly. Like the underground is no fun. And I know a lot of people actually rank this higher in the polls, but for me, I just can't enjoy playing that faction, and that for me just it takes it down to the bottom of the list. It actually has been a while since I mentioned that it can be almost impossible to find your second tunneling spider den. I found that when I excavated the map once, there was only one, and it was underneath something that I needed to dig through in order to see, so I couldn't just scout it out and then build towards it. I think that's a pretty big downside for this faction in general, but I don't know if that's going to affect a lot of games. Like multiplayer, sometimes you don't have the ability to get out towards a den before the big fights are happening. But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I had to say on this topic. If you feel like I missed anything or you just wanted to add some extra info, please feel free to do so in the comments below. I'll see you around. Have a good one.